Hello everyone, I'm Santiago and today I'm gonna be testing Far Cry 5 on the GeForce GTX 1050 Ti. For performance monitoring this time I won't be using cam due to Easy Anti-Cheat, which is the anti-cheat software this game uses, so in the meantime I'll be using MSI Afterburner. So Far Cry 5, I'll be doing 1080p, 900p, 720p and 1440p. To skip down at those sections of the video, check the description below. So well, first of all I'll show you the G4560 on 1080p and 720p, and that'll be to show you how the G4560 performs at a 30 to 40 FPS configuration, and then on 720p at a 60-ish FPS configuration, to see if the G4560 can maintain close to 60 frames per second. And I have some good news, it actually can. I saw some drops into the high 40s, but that was when I was just chasing some enemies in a place with a lot of foliage. There I saw that the GPU usage had some drops here and there. Still very playable, a very smooth experience. It wasn't a huge difference from the Ryzen 3, but Ryzen 3 was more stable overall. Of course, 4 cores on Ryzen 3 versus 2 cores, 4 threads on the G4560, since this game seems to take advantage of the extra threads. And then I showed the Ryzen 3 1200 with a 3.9 GHz overclock on 1080p, and then again I showed you the maximum settings on 1080p. Then I just lowered the settings, trying to maintain 60 frames per second or over 50 to say it some way, so the game feels way smoother. Then on 900p and 720p I do the exact same thing. I show you maximum settings, then I lowered the settings, trying to stay close to 60 frames per second. And finally at 1440p, since it was impossible to get anywhere close 60 frames per second, I just showed you configuration, trying to be over 30 frames per second as much as possible, with a couple drops to 27 FPS in the worst case scenario, nothing really that major, still a completely playable experience. But now I'm going to talk to you about the options menu and my experience testing this game. In the options menu, the two options that gave me the biggest hit to the performance were the shadow option and the geometry and vegetation option. So yeah, so far those two were the ones that gave me the biggest difference in performance. So in order to tweak the game, I just first lowered those like to medium or low, shadows, geometry and vegetation, and then the other options, except in texture filtering, I just lowered them one step down, and that should be enough to get a decent boost in performance. On the anti-aliasing options we have SMAA and TAA. Personally I prefer SMAA since TAA is usually a little too blurry for me, but SMAA seems to be performing better than TAA so far. And the options menu gives you a very good idea on how the things that you change affect the visuals of the game. You have different pictures that show you the difference in the graphics, and it also explains what those options do, but some of them don't explain that well. For example, environment, by lowering that to the minimum you lose the water reflections, the screen space reflections. For some reason we don't have an option for ambient occlusion or textures. The VRAM usage slider is not 100% accurate. Still, with 2 gigs of VRAM GPUs I didn't have much of a problem at all. Some stutters every now and then while trying ultra settings, but by just lowering terrain, shadows and geometry it helped with the stutters. And we also have a frame rate log option from 30 to 144 FPS, another thing that I like seeing in options menus, so we don't need any third-party software. And there's also a resolution slider going from 0.5 to 2.0. That means that it is from 50% resolution to 200% resolution, so if you want to keep your resolution and just crank up the internal rendering resolution to do super sampling or something like that, or even lower the resolution, it's a good option, so your HUD doesn't change sizes and you can read the text. That's something I really appreciate in an options menu as well. And there's also an FOV slider up to 120 degrees. I usually like to keep it at 90, 95, that's where my comfort zone is, but other than that there's a good options menu here. And so far the benchmark tool is a good reference to see what to expect from the performance of the game. It's quite demanding on the GPU, but I saw worse performance on the CPU side in the game itself, especially while just driving around in a very foliage dense area with a lot of trees and some enemies behind me just shooting. And that was enough to drop below what the benchmark tool shows, but it's not a huge difference, so I just recommend to try the benchmark tool. Is usually a good reference, except in on very specific places. So yeah, overall it seems to be performing very well. I wasn't expecting that from a Ubisoft game, but this seems to be very polished so far, at least on the performance side, which is what I'm just showing you here. And this game uses a lot of CPU. I saw a Ryzen 3 1200 with a 3.9 GHz overclock to be just maxed out, same with the G4560. Of course those are not high-end CPUs, but it's good to see that the game can use all the 4 threads just fine, takes advantage of your CPU. But between the G4560 and the Ryzen 3, I saw that the Ryzen 3 was more stable overall, and on the G4560 in some occasions there were more drops below 60 frames per second if you're just targeting 60. Still, it's very difficult to maintain 60s with these two CPUs, but you can still be very close, so in my opinion the game still feels smooth enough, which is what matters. But yeah guys, that's pretty much it. I hope you keep enjoying the video, thanks for watching and see you next time.
Appreciate the help.
Help me! seems the Resistance has been able to stock up on new supplies. Check out the shop if you get a chance.
God arms me with strength that makes my way perfect. Down, mutt. Get the dog off me! Joseph!